When people are addressing this deadlock between China and the US, we also need to pay attention to other multilateral relations. For example, how about the country of Japan, India, Australia, and the United States, also known as the Quad? So often we only talk about the Quad relationship from this economic and political aspect. However, according to some experts, though today, those four countries have extended their influence into the technological advancement. Why is that? And how does that change the world little by little? So that's why today, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite Dr. Raji. And Dr. Raji is the director of the Center for Security Strategy and Technology at the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi. She's also the technical advisor to the United Nations group of governmental experts on prevention of arms race in outer space, and also she authored and edited many important books. Without further ado, Dr. Raji, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Thank you so much, Will. Thank you for having me on this show to talk about technology and, a lot of different stuff that's going on in the Indo-Pacific. Absolutely. Thank you.
Absolutely, Dr. Raji, the pleasure is all mine. Now, as I mentioned before, initially when I discovered you, because this amazing article that you wrote, and is entitled, The Growing Tech Focus of the Quad, Writing New Rules of the Road for Critical and Emerging Technologies is a Key Imperative for the Quad. As I mentioned before, Dr. Raji, when we look at this Quad relationship that constitutes four important countries located strategically across the continent. But why is it today we need to address this technological compatibilities among the relationship? Help us understand.
So Quad, to go by the full name, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, it emerged initially in 2007, and the Quad 2.0 came about in 2017 November. So re-emergence of the Quad came about because the intensified sort of a competition in the Indo-Pacific only sort of accentuated over a period of a decade, in a sense. So the kind of competition and rivalry among the major powers that led to the Quad in the first place in 2007 had intensified a lot more by 27, a decade later. So in a sense, the imperatives that brought the Quad countries, India, Australia, Japan, and the United States, I think the commonality or the convergence of the strategic interests among the four countries had grown enormously over the last decade. So I think they decided that they would work on a range of issues, hardcore military security issues, which has been a core part of the agenda, as the title says. But I think there has also been an increasing focus on the technology aspects, which was not there in the initial Quad when it came about in 2007, for instance. The tech part of the new Quad is because of the technology rivalry, primarily between the United States and China, but it also has its tentacles spread out in other parts of the world, and certainly within the Indo-Pacific. So the Sino-US competition is also driving a lot of the technology competition among other powers, China and India, China and Japan, China and Australia. And given the kind of Chinese penetration into various societies, countries, in terms of pushing various technologies, take the case of the telecommunications. I think that's the best example to show you how the China has managed to penetrate into various societies, how they have compelled various states to make their own choices, compelled them to make their choices in favor of China. So these have been important markers, in a sense, for the Quad to take a look at the technology aspect as an important case. So when you look at the telecommunication case sector, the choice among the 5G, for instance, 5G vendors, the option to select, the freedom to select. Every country should have the freedom to choose, to make their own selection. But China has compelled many states, and when certain states have not taken a decision in favor of China, China has gone on to punish them through economic or other means, in a sense. So I think that is one reason as to why I think there is a growing focus among the Quad countries on on the technology aspects, because technology has now, especially in the backdrop of the COVID, whether it is in terms of digitalization, which has picked up in a greater speed, because everybody has had to switch overnight to digital means of communication and so on and so forth. So strengthening your 5G networks, strengthening your internet connectivity, all of that, whether you're paying, making a payment, or ability to communicate with each other, all of that now rests on your technology, digitalization, digital technologies, and so on and so forth. So technology has become, in a sense, a centerpiece in the emerging politics. It's not just politics, it's not just ideology, it's not just economics, but it's a mix of things that are driving today's competition. And the Quad did not really see technology as a big part of it for a long time, but I think it has come to recognize that. Even though 2017 the Quad 2.0 emerged, the technology did not really figure in for about 3 or 4 years, in a sense. So I think there is a growing recognition that like-minded states need to work together in building alternatives, in providing better services, technologies to all countries, and the process need to be fair, open, transparent, and so on and so forth. And I think that's a kind of buzzword that I see when I look at the kind of Quad conversations over the last 2 years now.
Dr. Raji, again, let's go back to the article that you mentioned. In March of 2021, there was a joint statement and include the content that 4 countries, I quote, will begin cooperation on the critical technologies of the future to ensure that innovation is consistent with a free, open, inclusive, and resilient Indo-Pacific, end quote. Dr. Raji, we know that this is such a powerful statement because it actually included so many indispensable elements that's distinctive for the 4 countries. But again, as an outsider, you're the expert. But for us, we want to know that 4 countries, when we talk about technology, that actually, put in a mild way, countries are very much interested in targeting different purposes. So by having this joint statement with a free, open, inclusive, and resilient Indo-Pacific, my question next one is, how should these 4 countries can reach their own purposes or targets by working together? Keep in mind, U.S. has always been on the front seat in terms of protecting the technological advancement and also ensuring that countries from Asia, from other parts of the world, won't interfere this technological advancement. So help us understand, Dr. Raji.
Yes, sure. But I think the statements comes from the fact that these are the kind of core objectives when you are pursuing, when the 4 countries or even other countries that have come to endorse the Indo-Pacific concept and so on and so forth are essentially talking about how do you ensure a free, open, inclusive, and resilient Indo-Pacific. The resiliency comes from, especially last 2 years, how you have seen as to how you are vulnerable because you're so dependent on one single country, whether you take the case of supply chains or other issues and computer chips and so on and so forth. On any number of issues, the over-dependence on one single country has brought out the vulnerabilities for all the major powers for sure, but even for other countries. So I think this is, it doesn't strike me as something's too strange. It is, I think, in line with the kind of Indo-Pacific strategies that we have talked about in the political scheme of things, or even economically, how we want to grow together and so on and so forth. But clearly, I think, so the goal, I don't think there is a problem. But you raised a very important point. The US has remained somewhat protective of its technologies. No country is going to sell the best of its technology to other countries. And that's a given thing, whether it is the US or whether it is the Soviet Union during the Cold War years. Nobody is willing to part with the best of technologies. Everybody is ready to share the sunset technologies, the technologies are that, in a sense, going away. But today's scenario is somewhat different. And I think building a coalition of countries that can, and I think when you look at the Quad countries, for instance, each of the countries have their own kind of technological strengths. With each of them bring to the table their own respective strength. So in a sense, I'm not saying that everybody is equal in a sense. The US the US remains the most dominant country when it comes to the technological strengths and overall prowess. But I think Japan, for instance, has its own strength. India has its own strength in certain key areas and so on and so forth. Australia has its own kind of strength. So there are, whether it is to talk about critical minerals, for instance, or supply chain issues. And supply chains, again, these are issues that are increasingly becoming important so there have been smaller coalitions, for instance. There is a Australia, France, India trilateral on building resilient supply chains, so supply chain resilience initiative. So there are, the Quad is not the only forum that has come about to talking more about technology, but even other trilaterals, other minilaterals are taking shape because these have become so important, so critical for our own economic growth, our development, and so on and so forth. So how do we address them in an effective manner? How do you bring in as many nations, as many countries as possible so that we are all on the same page? We all have the same goal of ensuring an inclusive, resilient Indo-Pacific that is freely able to make its technological choices, that has the freedom to develop its own technologies, that enables technology sharing, that enables them to develop in an equitable fashion, and so on and so forth. So I'm not. The circumstances under which, during the Cold War, you saw the US as a power that was very, very sensitive to sharing technology and so on and so forth. But I think that's changing. And especially with, for instance, if you were to take the case of the Quad, the Australia and Japan remains US security partners and alliance partners, and the technology sharing is much easier in the case of those countries. But even India and the US have now gone on to sign several important defense agreements, what they call the foundational agreements, which facilitate sharing of technology, sharing of sensitive information, and so on and so forth. So I think when the Quad puts out a thing to say that they are going to be talking about sharing or collaborating on the critical technologies of the future, that is in line with that also involves innovation and the entire ecosystem in a sense, so that we do recognize at the end of the day, a free, open, inclusive, and resilient Indo-Pacific. It is because there is political and security convergence, but also there are technological strength among these four countries that are compatible in a sense increasingly. And the situation today is very different from the 1960s and 70s when the US was extremely shy of sharing technology with other countries in a sense. So I think the circumstances are very different, and therefore you do see even a US that is much more willing and cooperative in that sense to look at technology sharing, technology collaboration with other countries, including with India. For much of the history, we stayed at two ends of the two poles in a sense. We were at the two ends of the spectrum. But I think India has also come to recognize the need to work with the US as well as other like-minded partners, because we have a bigger problem to deal with, a rising China, which has become a significant factor for India, and therefore even India, which is traditionally seen as sitting on the fence, has had to make some bold changes to how it looks at technology, how it looks at its security approaches, and so on and so forth.
Dr. Raji, I think there are several amazing points that you brought it up. Now, before we talk about ongoing tension between China and the US, let's put the politics on the side. But in reality, that we know from this technological competition, the whole world is watching how China and the US are actually competing with each other. As a matter of fact, on every single level, both countries are rather sensitive. Again, going back to the article you mentioned, something such as cybersecurity issues and the 5G development, and also this technological supply chains. But meanwhile, in reality, not every single country is seeing China as a major threat. But to a lot more experts or to a lot more leaders, the Quad, the leaders today, when they see China, particularly from this technology side, China has become a major concern. Again, Dr. Raji, you're the expert. I would love to ask you the simple question. How concerning is China today in terms of this technological security or this, cybersecurity or 5G development, particularly to the influence of the four countries?
China does represent as a major threat. To start with a very simple set of issues, China has conducted cyber attacks on every single Quad country. The increasing number of Chinese attacks, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. Even 2.5 years ago, India's one of the civil nuclear power plant sites, as well as the Indian Space Research Organization. In both cases, these are the two of the most important ones. In both cases, they were the administrative computers that were attacked, not the system lab computers that regulate the nuclear functioning or the space functioning and so on and so forth. But the fact is that it did demonstrate certain vulnerabilities that China continues to expose on India. Second, even in the middle of the conflict, that there's an ongoing conflict between India and China, for instance, on the border, which started in April-May 2020, and it's still an ongoing conflict. It's a live conflict. Even in the middle of a conflict, China conducted a major cyber attack. At least most reports have pointed the attack to China, where India's western city, Mumbai, which is considered the commercial capital of India, came under a major power outage for several hours during the day. This was a major attack on India's power infrastructure, again attributed to China. So, and these are cyber attacks that have happened already. But in terms of letting China's 5G, Huawei into your system and so on and so forth, India had not taken a decision for a very long time. India was sitting on the fence, did not want to take. India, traditionally sat on the fence, not wanting to make a select choice between the US and China. How do you avoid a situation of choosing one over the other? So India has sat on the fence for a longest time. But the Galvan conflict, which happened on the border in 2020, that has changed the dynamics in which how India perceives China. At least India's China policy has undergone a change. Since then, so not only the cyber attacks that have been happening within India as well as in other countries. I don't have to publicize the number of Chinese cyber attacks on the Australian infrastructure, so critical infrastructure. How many different sectors have been affected? All because Prime Minister Morrison asked for an independent inquiry into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. The US, Japan, each of these cases, there have been increasing number of cyber attacks on one. So that is cyber attacks is one set of issues. So cyber security, how that really plays out. Second is in terms of the 5G and the Huawei penetration into your country's networks and so on and so forth. At a time when we are talking about Internet of Things and how there is going to be everything is going to be interlinked in such a big fashion, getting the Chinese Chinese into your own networks is seen as sort of creating vulnerabilities from a national security perspective. And again, I think many countries have remained very vigilant or apprehensive of letting China into their telecom network and so on and so forth. India had not taken a decision. Even now, it's not entirely clear, but I think India took finally the decision to keep the Chinese companies out for sure after the 2020 Galvan conflict. But other countries, other Quad countries, for instance, had taken the decision much earlier that they will not let Chinese companies to come into their telecom networks and so on and so forth. Countries like UK, for instance, had initially given the Huawei a bigger space in their telecom network as well as to set up cyber parks and so on and so forth. But I think there was a lot of back and forth between the US and UK at that point of time. This was during the Trump administration time. And finally, the UK also decided to move away from the the Huawei as the provider for this 5G telecom networks. Now, not only the 5G, because you're already talking about 6G and 7G and so on and so
That's
forth.
right.
So in terms of giving China a foothold in your telecom network, he's going to compromise. He's going to have significant compromises when it comes to your own national security, because things are so interlinked given the Internet of Things that we talk about, not just in the commercial or the civil sector, but also the military and national security domains are so interconnected with their cyber networks. So giving China sort of a space in the cyber domain is like handing over your national security secrets to them on a platter, in a sense. So I think there are bigger vulnerabilities that come from China's participation in India's or even other countries, the Quad countries, their telecom and other networks, in critical networks. So critical infrastructure, I think when it comes to that, I think China is being seen as a problem, as a challenge to deal with, as a threat, as a national security threat. And therefore, and I think this competition is only going to intensify as technologies become more and more societies move towards incorporating various technologies into their civil as well as military sectors, in a sense, in the security sectors.
Dr. Raji, when we talk about China, and we also mentioned that before, and I know that over the years that you wrote and published many articles, the year of 2022 has been very critical and crucial for China. And again, when we think about China today, a well-known project, it's Belt and Road Initiative, that actually includes a lot more technological partnership or in addition to economic and a political influence. But meanwhile, if we take a look at around the world, countries in Southeast Asia, for example, recently one article came out state the country of Indonesia, it's actually embracing the presence of Huawei, and also it's celebrating the presence of such giant companies, because not only that help the local technological advancement, but also it generates more interest across the continent. But meanwhile, we know that U.S. has been trying really hard to make the direct influence with the countries in Southeast Asia. So Dr. Raji, my next question to you is, by influencing more countries in Southeast Asia under China, do you think that actually add more pressure to the Quad, specifically for the countries such as Japan, India, and the U.S. at this moment? So in other words, how do you think the U.S. is seeing that more countries in Southeast Asia or maybe any other parts of the world, they're actually embracing this technological support or favor from China, meanwhile are walking away slowly from the U.S. simply because the promise, the value, and the trust are no longer there?
I watch it as an outsider. I watch it with a lot of interest to see how this is all going to pan out, because let me give you a different example. China went into Sri Lanka with big promises of Belt and Road connectivity projects, everything to make the country profitable economically, a superpower. Colombo port is to become this and that. Hambantota to gain this kind of prominence, will remove Singapore and become the new Singapore in this part of the world, and so on and so forth. A lot of different promises were made. What has been the delivery? Where is Sri Lanka today? And Sri Lanka, when it finally went into a significant debt crisis, serious debt trap crisis, China is nowhere to be seen. I hope other countries do not have to go through this experience. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But the fact is that Sri Lanka was one of the best examples in terms of the human development indices. But if you were to look at the human development indices, development markers, or any other number of things, it was a small country, but significantly better in terms of their economic development, human rights with its education, health parameters. On all of different counts, they were doing pretty well. And it's not that other countries did not recognize that, okay, Hambantota port needs to be developed, or the Colombo port needs to be developed, you also need to look at the economic viability of those projects before pushing those countries to take on these massive projects, and which are not essentially bringing any economic profits at the end of the day. When there is no economic activity in these ports, they are not going to be able to sustain themselves on their own. And that is what has led to the Sri Lankan economic crisis, in a sense. I hope we don't find a security crisis or a cyber or other critical infrastructure crisis in whether it is in Indonesia. I've seen these reports and I've been like, wow. I can see, okay, there is a certain amount of trust issues and so on and so forth. You are not sure whether the US is going to deliver, the US is going to be the credible guarantor and so on and so forth, who will be there for you when there is a situation. But I'm not sure China is necessarily the option. The problem with other countries is that they are all democracies. They have to go through there are various pulls and pressures that are going to pull them apart, and they may not always present you with a credible, most authentic, and a selling point, in a sense. But China is a very different kind of different kind of a government, and it's a single person who has to make the decision. Xi Jinping has to make the decision, and it has to be enforced. So China has managed to sell it to the rest of the world that they are the best provider. They offer the best model of development. They offer the best model of governance, and so on and so forth. But I think that's not entirely true. But I think that's been whether it is in terms of how countries have managed the pandemic, to any number of things. China has tried to provide or show itself as the alternative to democracies, and so on and so forth. However deficient the democracy is, I'm still happy that I am located within a democracy and not in China. So incorporating such the Huawei and other such kind of big technology giants into national networks, I think there will be consequences sooner than later, because it's not that. I'm not entirely sure what is driving Indonesia, for instance. Even through the middle of the pandemic, when the pandemic had started in January of 2020, at least hit most of the parts of the world, even in the middle of the pandemic, you could see Chinese naval ships as well as maritime militia coming into the Indonesian exclusive economic zone, into Natuna Islands. So there have been serious security warnings, security issues between Indonesia and China as well. I am not entirely sure as to how Indonesia has been able to put aside all of those security issues and move ahead with China as the principal technology contributor or developer in there. I can only hope that they have made the wise choice and that they are not going to be going down like the Sri Lankan case, in a sense.
Dr. Raji, I know you are very busy. I got two more questions before letting you go. Also, I noticed that lately, not only you the expert for national security, technology security as well, but also you touch on some significant points regarding this bilateral relations between China and India at this moment. Now, recently, for the Chinese government, officials have been very busy. Not only that, visiting, participating some of the major critical conference and international events. For example, the foreign minister, the leader from this department, actually traveled extensively. He met up with multiple foreign ministers across the continent, and India was one of the countries. Now, given the fact the two countries today are looking for ways to work closely without creating conflict or political disentanglement. So, Dr. Raji, my next question to you is, how effective do you think today that when we talk about this mutual interest or this mutual economic interest between China and India at this moment without even bringing political or territorial dispute into the conversation?
I think India tried that route for a very long time. India, in fact, when Prime Minister Modi came into office, despite the fact that we have had this continuing, unresolved border and territorial issues between India and China for the longest time, And the 1962 war, the fact that we have gone into war with each other and so on and so forth, all that history, despite all that history, despite the troubled past, I think Modi, when he came into office, was of the view that he can or he wanted to bring China into India, especially in the economic and investment domain. He wanted the Chinese investment so that India can grow. We still have about 400 to 500 million people below poverty line. So we need to change the lives of those people. And I think that's been an important agenda for India as well as any other country in a sense, for India. For India's any leadership in a sense. So that was the goal when Prime Minister Modi took office. But things changed from 2014 onwards. From the first visit of Xi Jinping into India in September 2014. Since then, on the one hand, President Xi comes and says, we want to have the best relations with India. He uses the formulations like Chindia. We are the two major Asian powers who can do things together. Blah blah blah. A lot of nice things. Good, nice sounding words. But as the two leaders were talking to each other in the capital in Delhi, there were major border disruptions, border transgressions that were happening, carried out by the PLA. So it's in a sense, it was not very clear as to what is that China wants to do with India. So on the one hand, you come with a hand, shaking a hand, saying that we want to be best friends with you. We want to do things together, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, you have the PLA forces right on the border, crossing over into the Indian territory, and so on and so forth. And you're not willing to resolve you're not even willing to have border negotiations so that we can finally resolve that particular issue so that we can focus on bilateral economic and other development issues and so on and so forth. So there have been, and this is not the first time. 2017, you had a major conflict again, which lasted for 72 days, which was the Doklam crisis. Doklam happened to be the tri-junction of Bhutan, India, and China. Again, that conflict went on and on for 71 days. We managed to resolve it. But I think a lot of us, at least many of us in the security community, strategy community in Delhi, in India, knew that this is the kind of China that India needs to be prepared to be dealing with. This is a China. This is not an aberration. This is not an exception. This is the China that you're going to be faced with increasingly. And I wish I were wrong, but that is the China that it has proven to be. Because right after the Doklam crisis, India and China went into holding two informal summits. First one was held in Wuhan, and second one was held in India, in southern India. And everybody talked about, there is a Wuhan sentiment, that there's positivity, there's a reset in the relationship. No, there was no reset. You had to be so naive to think that there was to be a reset in the relationship when the basic nature of relations between India and China cannot be resolved at this point of time. Because the basic fundamental question to me is China willing to live with the rising India at the same time? Is China willing to live with a marginally rising Japan at the same time? China wants to have an exclusive sense of its rise. China wants to be the sole superpower, a great hegemon in the region and beyond. And India does not want to see an Asia that is dominated by one single power, that is China. So there is a serious issue of a conflict there in a sense. India as well as Japan, for instance, have adopted as somewhat of an inclusive approach, where you are willing to see the rise of other powers simultaneously. So that's a big problem. Even then, I think we have been trying to sort of do economic and trade interactions and so on and so forth. Even during the last 2 years, despite the Galvan conflict, the economic trade component has been growing, has been at least stable. There has not been any interruptions. But the fact is that trade is not going to remove the security issues that are increasingly creating or have created huge amount of trust issues between India and China. That's not going to go away. So trade can happen for the sake of the certain constituencies in both countries. Certain constituencies continue to benefit from the trade interactions. But that does not change the basic nature of India-China relations because there are deeper political, historical issues, and the trust deficit between the two sides is far too great. And China has not done anything to reassure India that India can also grow. And India is maybe 2 or 3 or 4 generations behind China. China need not feel sort of threatened by India's rights. India's marginal rise is also seen as a problem from Chinese perspective, in a sense. So that is the. So I don't think we can put aside the territorial political issues aside. And I think even till the Galvan conflict happened, India still tried to choose the middle path. But I don't think that option is there anymore with India. For instance, India never used to, whenever the Quad meeting happened, India never used to say it as a Quad. He would, the statements, the Minister of External Affairs statement would say, the leaders of the 4 countries, Australia, India, Japan, and the United States met. But after the Galvan conflict, look at the statements. It clearly says quadrilateral. Since the Galvan conflict, India has now invited Australia into the Malabar series of naval exercises. Again, an indication of how India has had to respond to the lack of Chinese response to find an amicable way of dealing with the border crisis, in a sense. So India will increasingly partner with other like-minded countries because all of us face a significant problem threat in terms of from China, whether it is conventional military side or on the technological front. Everywhere it is China, with our supply chains, critical minerals, on any number of these issues. China has been holding the gun on everybody. So India will partner with other countries to find a way to deal with this insecurities that we face from not having stable supply chains or stable technology flow and so on and so forth. So India as well as other Quad countries will try and build larger network of countries in the hope that we can all work together in enabling technology for our growth and development and stability.
Dr. Raji, I want to end our conversation by going back to the article. Again, something that you wrote was quite outstanding, and I quote, "The Quad has also begun to focus on other emerging technologies, such as advanced biotechnologies, including synthetic biology and biomanufacturing, while exploring areas of cooperation among the Quad countries." You know, and also as much as that we know that when we talk about advanced biotechnologies and, biomanufacturing, all those complicated but it's essential and significant scientific and technological advancement. My last question is very simple. How much do you think India can contribute to such major project? Because we know, again, based on what you said, if China is keep on guarding the information or playing not by the games or not by the rules, but there has to be major contributions from the 4 members in order to consolidate the power. So again, Dr. Raji, how would you see India today contribute to those emerging technological projects as I mentioned before?
So, that's a great question, but I think there is very little information out there as to how the 4 countries are going to collaborate in this particular regard. But one of the core things that have come out from the statements is that Quad fellowship, for instance. So how do you create better human resources, looking at researching, studying these technologies and their impact and so on and so forth? So I think that is that's the first step for India, for instance. From an Indian perspective, how India can grow its human resources there is some amount of expertise available in small institutes, certain institutions within the country. but it's nothing comparable to the scale that China or other countries that may have. So in a sense, from India's perspective, what we are trying to achieve is in terms of using the Quad Fellowship and other such opportunities. There are a number of initiatives that have come about in the India-Australia context, as well as India-US, as well as through the Quad Fellowship. So India is planning to, for instance, send its best of the students across, whether it is Australia or Japan or to the US, and develop that expertise and human resources that is able to study, develop the technologies and so on and so forth. But I think that's still a work in progress. I don't think we have a lot of information to go by at this particular stage, but I think the Quad Fellowship and some of the other bilateral projects between India and Australia and India and the US can be a good way to kind of focus on the human resources that is required, that expertise that is required to be developed within India in a sense. So I think that's going to be the first step, I would think, in the work in progress that at least in these areas in a sense.
Well, Dr. Raji is the director of the Center for Security Strategy and Technology at the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi. And also, she has authored or edited 9 different books, including Global Nuclear Security, Moving Beyond the NSS, Space Policy 2.0, etc. Again, ladies and gentlemen, I strongly encourage everyone to go online, look for Dr. Raji's latest article as we discuss in this episode entitled The Growing Tech Focus of the Quad, Writing New Rules of the Road for Critical and Emerging Technologies. It's a key imperative for the Quad. Dr. Raji, thank you so much for taking your time to join the show. We'd love to have you back on the show as we continue to focus and follow the political and also this technological advancement among the Quad members. Thank you, Dr. Raji.